Ingles.fm, Real English Conversations, Series 1. Podcast 7, Musica. Este podcast contiene una conversación real y sin guión entre dos hablantes nativos de inglés, Mark y Tom. Oirás primero la conversación y a continuación una clase de inglés con explicaciones en español. Cada podcast viene con un workbook detallado que puedes descargar desde nuestra página web ingles.fm. Incluye una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Recuerda que los miembros de nuestra lista de distribución reciben gratis transcripciones extra de nuestros podcasts, además de muchas otras cosas gratis. Así que no olvides apuntarte al consultar la página. Buena suerte.
Hi, I'm Tom, and I'm sitting here with Mark again. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Tom.
Today we're sitting in Ciudadella Park again in Barcelona under a palm tree because it's extremely hot at the moment. So we're going to talk all about music today. Why are we qualified to talk about music? What relationship to music have we had in our lives?
Well, in the past we used to listen to a lot of music, but at university we studied anthropology. One of the units we studied there was ethnomusicology, which is essentially the anthropology of music.
Yeah, and of course Mark was a very avid gigger, which meant he went to lots and lots of concerts in London for a few years. And I've played guitar in several bands, and I've been a DJ in London for 7 years, and I've worked in the music industry in London for 2 years as well, so quite a big interest in music. So first of all, we're going to talk about the origins of music. Now, what are some of the theories on when music originated?
Well, one theory is that music originated between 60 and 30,000 years ago, along with the first signs of civilization, such as cave paintings, and, as we've learned from a previous podcast, beer making.
Yeah, so people started drinking beer and making music at the same time. There could be a correlation there. And it's thought that as far back as 2 million years ago, people started beating out rhythms. Rhythms originated in percussion, using bones and sticks and stones to make noises, to make rhythms, and to basically communicate using these sounds. And it's also thought that originally people spoke, language came perhaps from rhythmic sounds that humans made. So the human voice is considered by some people to be the oldest instrument.
That makes sense.
And the oldest actual instrument found to date is a 35,000-year-old flute that was found in a cave in Germany. And this is the first proper instrument, and it was made out of a vulture bone, I think, an animal bone.
So it was carved into an instrument from a bone?
Yeah, and it's a proper, I've seen photos of it on the internet, it looks like a flute, basically, but 35,000 years old. So it's thought that music probably developed parallel to language over the thousands of years, and coming up to the present day, we're now going to switch the topic a bit and talk a little bit about the UK music scene, because we've had experience of it, and also because music in the UK has had a large influence on music around the world. Even though England and the United Kingdom is a small island, there's been a big impact with music produced there. What's one of the first, or perhaps one of the most famous British bands that have come out of England?
I'd say, going back, the Beatles?
Yeah, and the Beatles were part of what was known as the British invasion, because in the 1950s and 60s the UK and America started swapping a lot of music forms between them, and music would come from America to England and be modified or adapted in England and then be sold back to America, and vice versa.
So there was a continuing special relationship even in terms of music.
Yeah, exactly. So we were taking their influences and they were taking ours, and we were selling each other's music to each other. And following that, what are some other big bands, famous bands that came out of the UK in the 60s?
Remember the Rolling Stones are still going.
Yeah, Rolling Stones, they're quite old now.
Led Zeppelin, and were Pink Floyd 60s as well?
Yeah, Pink Floyd, and they went into the 70s as well. They changed their style in the 70s. And in the 1970s, some more famous British bands. Well, basically the music coming out of Britain then was known in some of the main forms were psychedelic rock, punk and heavy rock. And some of the more famous bands were...
I would say Queen, maybe for psychedelic rock. Punk, maybe people like the Sex Pistols or the Damned.
Yeah, the Clash as well, they're quite famous.
For heavy rock, maybe for English, I can only think of maybe Iron Maiden in the late 70s.
Yeah, and David Bowie as well came out of the 70s with his more sort of glam rock.
Another 70s phenomenon, I remember that when I was being a kid.
And then in the 1980s we had, coming out of England, new wave and indie rock. Now, can you explain, or can you give some examples of new wave bands and indie rock bands?
Well, these are probably the first bands I remember from being, 10 through teenager. But I remember Duran Duran, The Cure, Wham, Dire Straits, The Police.
Yeah, the Eurythmics with Annie Lennox, and Culture Club with Boy George. UB40, I don't know if people have heard of them, but they were influenced by reggae and Jamaican music. And then at the end of the 80s came house music. Now, house music is something that I've been quite involved in, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a minute. Before we're going to talk about the 1990s and what happened in the 1990s in England.
Lots of different styles of music. The Britpop phenomenon. So bands like Oasis became huge globally.
But before that, in the early 90s, there was another scene.
The early rave scene.
Yeah, the rave scene and what's become known as Madchester.
Because it began in Manchester, in the north of England.
And they changed it to Mad, because it was crazy and mad. Some other forms coming out were drum and bass. I don't know if you just mentioned that. And what are some famous Madchester bands?
The Stone Roses and the Happy Mondays are all I can remember from that time.
Well, they're the principal ones. They were very famous, and they changed. They had a huge influence on British music, but aren't so famous abroad. And I absolutely loved the Stone Roses. I wasn't so much a fan of the Happy Mondays, but the Stone Roses were my favourite band for many years. And who else came out of the 90s? People like The Prodigy, Radiohead,
Spice Girls?
The Spice Girls as well, yeah. They took America by storm, another invasion. Take That and Robbie Williams. And then some slightly less well-known bands like the trip-hop bands of Massive Attack, Portishead, and drum and bass people like Ronnie Size, Goldie, and Fabio and Groove Rider. And then finally, since the 2000s, what's some of the famous artists coming out of the UK?
Coldplay and Radiohead.
Yeah, Radiohead again. They've spanned 2 decades.
David Gray.
Yeah, James Blunt. They've all had quite a lot of international success. Amy Winehouse, Dido. Everyone knows Dido around Europe. So going back to our focus on raves and acid house parties, what exactly was an acid house party?
Well, it was normally illegally organised party and was broadcast through pirate, so illegal radio stations giving addresses or locations to meet on motorways. And normally people would congregate at the meeting point and get further directions to go to a field where there would be an enormous sound system and people would listen to loud dance music, take lots of ecstasy and dance either until dawn or until the police arrived.
And this was a massive, massive explosion in the UK around 1988 and 1999 because it originated because a couple of British DJs brought back music they'd heard in Ibiza. That came originally, it was house music, and it originated in Chicago and Detroit. They brought it to Ibiza. It came to Ibiza, and they went to Ibiza in 1987, loved it, and brought that back to London. And it was then combined with people taking ecstasy, and it just caused a huge explosion. It was a youth subculture in England that took the whole country by storm. And in the end, what's happened with the police?
Well, the government decided that because it was large, unsupervised crowds with drug taking, that it needed to be controlled. So in 1994, they passed a law called the Criminal Justice Act, which meant that it was formally illegal to conduct, hold, attend, or host a rave, and it went so far as to prevent the gathering of 10 or more people listening to or preparing to listen to music.
Yeah, and it was specific music. It was music with repetitive beats, so boom, boom, boom music.
So you could listen to other types of music, but that particular type of music, there was a moral panic, so that music was seen as evil.
Yeah, and like one or two people died from taking ecstasy, and the newspapers had all over them the evils of ecstasy, the evils of rave music, and yeah, it was a huge moral panic, like you said. And we went on the protests in London, didn't we, against the Criminal Justice Act?
Yes,
because we thought it was an infringement on civil liberties, like a lot of other people.
Yes, if you have a birthday party in your house and you have 10 friends and yourself, 11 people, you listen to this music, you could be arrested and imprisoned.
Luckily, we never got arrested.
No,
but long
may that continue.
It was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
It was while it lasted.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hola, me llamo Rosario y la clase de hoy va a ser un poco diferente. En la conversación, Mark y Tom hablan de la special relationship que hay entre Estados Unidos y el Reino Unido, en referencia al intercambio de música que ha habido entre los dos países a lo largo de los años. También ha habido intercambios en el lenguaje entre Inglaterra y Norteamérica. Nos vamos a centrar en las variaciones más comunes que hay entre el inglés de Norteamérica y el inglés que se conoce como The Queen's English, ya que pueden llevar a malentendidos entre hablantes nativos y pueden confundir sobre todo a personas que estén aprendiendo inglés como lengua extranjera. Por ejemplo, en Inglaterra, basura es rubbish, pero en Estados Unidos es trash o garbage. En Inglaterra, fag es la versión coloquial de cigarrillo. En Estados Unidos, fag es una forma coloquial de decir homosexual. En Inglaterra, pantalones son trousers, pero en Estados Unidos son pants. En Inglaterra, pants es ropa interior de hombre y también se usa como adjetivo coloquial para decir que algo es malo o de mala calidad. En Inglaterra, calzado deportivo es trainers, pero en Estados Unidos se dice sneakers. En Inglaterra, pissed quiere decir borracho en coloquial, pero en Estados Unidos, pissed es enfadado en coloquial. En Inglaterra, enfadado es pissed off. En Inglaterra, galletas se dice biscuits, pero en Estados Unidos se dice cookies. En Inglaterra, dulces o caramelos son sweets. En Estados Unidos son candies. En Inglaterra, patatas fritas de bolsa son crisps. En Estados Unidos, chips. En Inglaterra, patatas fritas son chips. En Estados Unidos, French fries. En Inglaterra, acera o andén se dice pavement. En Estados Unidos, sidewalk. En Inglaterra, metro es underground. En Estados Unidos es subway. Please note, most of these terms are generally understood in both countries.
But do be careful if you ask for a fag in New York.
Gracias por acompañarnos con este podcast de Ingles.fm. Recuerda que el workbook contiene una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Lo puedes descargar de forma instantánea desde Ingles.fm. ¡Nos vemos!